Welcome to Creation in the 21st Century. I'm your host, Carl Baugh, founder and director of the Creation Evidence Museum in Glen Rose, Texas. Appropriately, the title to the program today is Reclaiming Biology, Part 2. And it is most appropriate that we are in the setting. This is a reenactment, a platform, stage reenactment of the Babylonian palace of Ahasuerus and Queen Esther. It is most appropriate, and in the background we have the pristine waters. You can hear them at this very moment. In the background we have the silhouette of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. That's biology in planned, procedural documentation. Those hanging gardens existed. How could they exist if, in their pristine environment from which they were taken, there were not a scientific investigation as to how they would live and grow and propagate? That is scientific. In the background behind that tremendously successful scientific procedure of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, we have a backdrop of the first mention of naturalism, secularism, humanism, evolution. That first mention of evolution was produced with the document, the religious document, Enuma Elish, with the Babylonian, in concert with the Babylonian politicians. So thus we have the first introduction of the theory of evolution in the history of investigation. And it was not a scientific document, it was a religious document. The guest that I'm going to introduce in just a moment has data to show that evolution innately, at its soul, and in its very procedural observation techniques, the theory of evolution is religious in nature. But on the other hand, we have the concept of creation that truly is scientific. And it's quite natural that in a pagan environment, with Israel in captivity, with Esther having to plead for her very life and risk that very life in order to save the entity of the nation of Israel and the record of creation, she in valor proceeded. We have individuals who in this generation who are proceeding with valor. One of those is my special guest. I want to welcome today Dr. Joseph Mastropaolo. Dr. Mastropaolo, it is always a delight to have you on the program.
It's my pleasure to be here, Dr. Baugh.
And if the response from the audience is any barometric indicator of pressure coming, people responding to the energy and the vitality of the truth you have to present, you're premier.
I think it's the truth that does it. I take very little credit.
We're just conduits for truth, aren't we?
Exactly.
And what an absolute privilege to have you on the telecast and to declare to this global audience the facts. Now, you tell me that you, as a scientist, have evidence that the very heart and soul of evolutionary concept is religious, but the very foundation of creation is scientific. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying. And I'm ready to contend against any evolutionist that wants to prove me wrong. I would be glad to enrich him with $10,000.
Oh, now that's marvelous. This audience, this global audience, with many scholars viewing, because we do have many academicians who watch this program worldwide, you are offering $10,000. Now, what's the basic offer?
The basic offer is they come to Superior Court, present their scientific evidence, which must be objective, valid, reliable, and calibrated, and the judge will decide which side prevails.
The evidence they claim to have supporting evolution,
or the evidence I have supporting creation, and whoever prevails will receive their check for $10,000 and my check for $10,000.
Wow. So they put up $10,000, you put up $10,000, and whoever the judge decide has the weight of evidence receives all $20,000, so you get $10,000 profit.
Yes, and I'm offering a $1,000 reward for any person that will find an evolutionist that will come and complete the competition with me.
Now, let's challenge the general viewers in our audience. Worldwide, you can make $1,000 just by coming up with some professor, some bona fide academician who will accept this challenge.
Correct.
Now, you have made this challenge, you call it the Life Science Award, I believe.
Yes.
You've made this challenge how many times?
We've made it now for 3 years, inviting 57 of the world's foremost evolutionists worldwide, bar none, and 19 of their organizations, more than 500 evolutionists altogether. And we have yet to find one that will accept being personally enriched by $10,000 to bring forth the scientific evidence they allege that they have.
This is incredible. The world, you have approached, as we're going to see in a thumbnail sketch in a moment, you have approached, you've communicated with the world's leading scientific academicians who hold to evolutionary theory, and you've personally challenged them, and not one of them has responded.
Correct.
That means they've lost by default.
Exactly. And that's exactly what they did in Kansas. Kansas had hearings for intelligent design. They brought 17 PhDs that gave some of the best papers I'd ever heard in my entire life. And I've been to such meetings as the Federation meetings and so on. And the evolutionists, when it came their turn, had not one person to confess, to testify in their behalf.
Not a single evolutionist appeared
Not one.
at the hearings.
Not one.
Now, Dr. Mastropaolo, before we run through this information and the scenario, you're in phase 4 now of this challenge, our audience needs to know who you are. Now, you're not an elementary school teacher, are you? Even though we do need qualified elementary school teachers to build the right foundation in those young minds.
The first job I had was teaching elementary school.
Beautiful, beautiful. I commend you. You are a PhD graduate from the University of Iowa.
Correct.
In kinesiology, have studies, the ultimate studies in biology, and you also have studies in physics and math along the way. You're also a postdoctoral fellow examining the potential of the human body. Is that correct?
That's correct. Human physiology.
Our audience needs to know that this is a credentialed scientist making this offer, and our audience needs to listen to what you have to say. Now, the time just got away from us in the last program, but we do need to, at least in a brief sketch, retrace where we were in the last program, assuming that not everyone viewing today was viewing the last program, and assuming that not everyone remembers everything you had to say. So let's retrace our steps. As Dr. Mastropaolo is getting in position to do that, I want you to notice that we brought to the set, and we commend TBN for erecting this magnificent palatial reenactment of the Babylonian palace. We brought to the set a centuries-old lambskin vellum scroll of the book of Esther, describing the background of this context, and it is most appropriate that this background be announced because we have a Babylonian conspiracy of naturalism that is pervading our entire generation. And the purpose of Haman was to eradicate the Jews, and the record of creation they had intact. And we have a generation of academicians who have sequestered out the evidence in order to attempt to eliminate the real truth, biological truth, scientific truth of creation. Now, to our special guest. Would you just briefly, without naming them all, tell us a few of the eminent credentialed evolutionary scholars that you've challenged to accept this award?
Yes, this was Barry Lynn, Eugenie Scott, Kenneth Miller, Michael Roos, Richard Dawkins, Stephen Hawking, some of the most famous names in the evolutionist community. Dr. Krauss is one of the foremost ones in Kansas, yet he refused to come forward with his alleged scientific information.
When it was time to lay down the gauntlet and say, put up or shut up, they didn't have a word to say.
They didn't have a word. And so it went for 57 of them, and 19 of their organizations, including the Nobel Prize Assembly, and there is the chairman of it. We challenged him as well. He was number 38 on the list. More than 500 worldwide, plus the people in Kansas that refused to testify. So we have done, over 3 years, with the help of my friend Carl Priest in West Virginia, we have challenged these people. We have made a Herculean effort to bring them forward with their alleged scientific evidence, and we have come up with nothing. And I have said that I'm ready to contend. Do you have science? The same question we asked them, and I have said, yes, I do. And I'm ready to contend in Superior Court.
And by the silence of their not even appearing, first of all, not accepting your challenge, because they claim to this entire generation, we have evidence supporting evolution. Then by the silence at not even appearing in support of evolutionary documentation at the hearings in Kansas, the silence echoes loudly through the chambers of academic procedures. What you're doing at the moment will have impact that will affect our entire generation. That silence echoes loudly.
That silence, as they say, speaks volumes.
Yes, it does.
It speaks volumes.
Now, I understand that you are in phase 4 now in this procedure, in this challenge. Briefly describe phase 1.
Phase 1 was to search in a scholarly manner all of the literature, but not just in the past 10 years or 20 years or 50 years. I went back 2,500 years. And what I found was this concept of evolution comes from the work of Anaximander, a philosophy in ancient Greece.
Yes.
And some was contributed by Empedocles and some more from Aristotle. Darwin had virtually nothing to say that was new or original.
Now, that's a tremendous statement that needs to be made. As we transfer to spell out these procedures that Dr. Mastropaolo has enacted and the phases in which he's involved, and he is the spokesman and leader for this entire movement to find the truth. As we do so, we need to accentuate what he just said. That is that Charles Darwin had no original data, no original thought. In fact, he borrowed the term natural selection from his own grandfather, Erasmus, never giving credit to his own grandfather for the term. He was a foul lamp that appeared to be a bright light to a generation that was ready to accept anything that was naturalistic. And as you've already pointed out, he stole directly from the concepts of Anaximander and Empedocles and from the record of Enuma Elish that was prior to that. But these men that you have mentioned actually stated a procedure on planet Earth and called it scientific. And he borrowed from that, making no original contributions to it, yet he's given all the credit of this generation.
When someone says Darwin is a great scientist, what we must do in a body is rise up and say he is a great anti-scientist.
And a plagiarizer at best.
And we have to mention the true scientists like Francesco Redi in 1665, who proved that maggots come from flies' eggs, Louis Pasteur, who proved that yeast was airborne, and that was why wines and beers fermented, and John Tyndall in 1877, who proved that the bacteria were floating on motes of dust, and when the chamber was completely clear, no dust, no bacteria. Those people proved beyond a shadow of a doubt, they were the scientists, that there is no such thing as vitalism, which evolution depends upon. There's no such thing as one thing transferring to another. or life springing up by itself. Those are the men that we should admire. And the other person is Joseph Lister, who in 1865 took what Louis Pasteur had done, applied it to medicine, saved lives, relieved suffering. That is what scientists are meant to do, not go back to superstitious vitalism times the way Darwin did.
And these scientists that you've mentioned have actually affected our generation in practical, tangible areas in medicine, life sciences, and they all espouse the concept of creation.
Correct. And they were held back by any kind of evolutionist indoctrination that they received.
Yes.
So that's what we need to do.
Now, as time has marched very rapidly, will you tell us about the phases you're involved in now?
Well, we want to show that if someone mentions reality, what they're effectively saying is it's the opposite of evolution. So if you're taught in class that evolution says this, believe the opposite and you'll have reality. For example, the evolutionists say evolution is true, science says devolution is true.
That is, things are running down.
The finger of time points downward. It doesn't point upward, not without engineering. Evolutionists say time engineers, science says time ravages.
Yes.
The evolutionists say the earth is old, science says the earth is young. Evolution teaches a grandiose functional psychosis. That's what they're teaching. And there are consequences to that. The consequences are that if you look at what we have in 4th grade before they are beginning their evolutionist indoctrination, you see there's only 4% of the world's population better than our 4th graders in science. Yet by the time we get done indoctrinating them with evolution, we have dumbed them down 50% in science,
Dr. Mastropaolo,
40% in mathematics.
This needs to be stated again. According to the propaganda and the procedure, according to the parameters of science, evolution teaches that there's a grandiose functional psychosis. That is, that we're teaching and elevating these individuals in their potential. But what you're saying is you have the data to show that they're dumbing our generation down.
Exactly. Not only in science, which is they're being dumbed down 50%, but the language of science is mathematics. They're being dumbed down 40% in that. And that is not an opinion. It's the National Commission on Mathematics and Science Teaching for the 21st Century, U.S. Department of Education. So we have this being investigated by people that are competent in education, in achievement in education, and they are showing us that during those years when we are functionally making these people psychotic because we're telling them reality is exactly the opposite of what it really is, we see that they lose their confidence and achievement in science and math.
Oh, that is a profound statement. Not only are we making them psychotic, we're destroying whatever hope has been invested in them from childhood and their families, and we are generating an entire population that has a propensity toward hopelessness and suicide. So we're pell-mell racing toward genocide. In the moments that we have left, would you give us again the phases as you are participating in them and leading them at the moment?
Phase 1 was to review the literature. We found 0 science. Phase 2, the Life Science Prize. 0 would come forward. Phase 3 was going to be the trial. They completely defaulted. Phase 4 we're in now. Federal court, we're going to try and bring them to federal court. If they don't show up, we'll get a default judgment and something will be done. We're going to expel evolution from the public schools. That is what we have to do. And we have started it. We're going to provide T-shirts for anyone willing to wear it that says evolution is a lie. And on the back, it will say, if you disagree, win $10,000. And if they are challenged by their principal or anyone that will punish or prevent them from going to school, we have identified the legal organization that will uphold them in their freedom of speech.
That is a profoundly beautiful statement. We need to do something about this. We will never be able to remove humanism completely from life interpretations, but we need to expose it for what it is. Naturalism is a part of the interpretation of living systems that is paganistic and religious, and we need to expose it for what it is. At the same time, we need to expose creation as being genuinely scientific. Dr. Mastropaolo, let me ask you the most important question. We know that you've done a commendable and masterful job in exposing to those who will listen the lie of evolution, especially as being supported scientifically. Can you now tell this global audience, do you have, as a scientist, as a credentialed scientist, do you have tangible evidence supporting creation?
I do. I have scientific evidence supporting creation. And I can prove, although many people say they cannot, but I can prove that there is a God, strictly through biological science. I can do that. And so can everyone else if we remove the censorship of evolution. And that is the fundamental wrong that's being done in our society. We are preventing people from thinking thoughts that are true, that are commensurate with our reality, and that would prove to them that God not only exists but loves us, that all mankind are brothers, that Adam and Eve were real people, and that the earth is young, and they are being prevented from thinking thoughts like that. And I think there is the major crime that evolution is doing to our society.
In fact, I think we'd better do another program. Can you stay for a third program, and we'll major on evidence supporting creation?
I will.
Now, for the time remaining in this program, let's go to the center of the set so the audience can get the ambiance of the background that espoused naturalism, secularism, humanism, evolution, the Babylonian background that by design attempted to destroy the testimony of the Israelites, the Jews, and destroy the message of creation they had. So in that background, assuming the Hanging Gardens of Babylon are populated not only by the biota in plant form, but by avian creatures, hummingbirds flying to the scenes to enjoy the nectar. At breakfast this morning, you told us about a beautiful experiment with a little hummingbird. Can you give this audience in 3 minutes that beautiful experiment?
One of my sons brought home this little baby hummingbird that had fallen out of its nest that didn't have all of its feathers. So we had to find out how to feed it and nurture it so that it might grow up and fly, perhaps be put back in its natural habitat. So we called the San Diego Zoo, and they said feed it sugared water. But I said, how can it make protein out of carbohydrate? So
as a kinesiologist, you knew what they did not know.
Yes, and so they called back and said fruit flies. Well, we had plenty of those under our orange tree, so we fed it fruit flies and sugared water, and pretty soon it had all of its feathers. Then soon it was hovering above the little nest that we made for it. The next day it was able to fly and hit the drapes. The next day it was able to turn and come back to its nest. And it was that moment that I told my son, we have to decide, is this going to be a pet or shall we put it in the natural environment? He said, let it go free. And I said, I agree. And so we did, and we put it up on a platform, and it flew up into the junipers after we had fed it many fruit flies and plenty of sugared water to make sure it was well provisioned. And one day I was sitting out on the lawn, and this hummingbird came to me from about the distance that you and I are separated, and it looked at me sideways and then this way and sideways, and I very quietly said, I'm not your mother, and it flew away.
The tremendous scientific fallout to that beautiful experiment is as follows. Dr. Mastropaolo explained at the breakfast table this morning that the scientific community, evolutionary portion of the scientific community, had taught that the hummingbirds had to learn to fly and to bank and to respond by the signals from the mother and the incubation of the spirit of flying. But instead, what they found was that this precious little hummingbird, completely isolated from natural response from parenthood, genetically already had the information, the software, and the hardware in place to learn to fly. And a little child led them to that experience. Wouldn't you let a little child lead you at this moment? In the future millennium, a little child will lead the lion, the lamb, the wolf. But I want the Lion of the tribe of Judah to be your objective at the moment, and the truth of that little child should lead you to soar for eternity. The truth is, by nature we have fallen out of the nest. By nature we have no hope. We needed help, but someone reached down. The God of this universe trafficked on planet Earth, was born in a stable, placed in a manger, went to Calvary, died for your sins, right now is asking entrance into your heart. Would you pray this simple prayer? Just pray simply this prayer from your heart. Dear God, I'm a sinner. Lord Jesus, I open my heart to you. Right now, I ask you to come into my heart, live there forever, and I'll serve you for all time and eternity. Information like you've received today is available at the Creation Evidence Museum. In printed form, in videos, we even have a coloring book for the kids. Just call or write us at Creation Evidence Museum, P.O. Box 309, Glen Rose, Texas, 76043, area code 254-897-3200, or check us out on the web, creationevidence.org.